Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, and today is going to be a prediction about a certain character that even though we may not have been able to meet just yet, but they were already a huge subject point in 6.1. And if you haven't been able to tell from the title of who it is, then I honestly have no hope for you. So yes, today we are going to be delving into the possible fate of the 7th dragon of the first brood, the one that we've yet to meet, Azdaja. Quick warning, there are going to be spoilers for 6.1, so watch only if you dare. So just a quick bit of backstory for Azdaja, for those of you who are in the back of the class before we get into the full prediction. But Azdaja is a great worm born as one of the first brood, or as one of the children of Midgardsormr. She had hatched much earlier than her brother Vitra, so that when Midgardsormr entered his dormancy, she was the one who looked after the egg of her youngest brother. This created a bond between the two of them, and even after Vitra grew up and learned how to fend for himself, the two were still inseparable. When the first brood were all finally ready to leave the nest, so to speak, they all did it in groups. So while their siblings kind of broke up into two other groups, Azdaja and Vitra remained together for many years afterwards. It wasn't until the third astral era, roughly around 5,000 years before the start of the story, did that change, and the two were suddenly separated from each other. The southern land of Mericidia, where their siblings Bahamut and Tiamat had made their home, were invaded by the Allagan Empire. The newly resurrected Emperor Xande formed a pact with the Cloud of Darkness from the Void, or the 13th Shard if you want to be specific, and this allowed Xande to use Voidsent as part of his army in exchange for bringing the Voidsents from the Void to the Source. So he used these Voidsent to invade Mericidia, and because of their alliance, the Allagans were able to succeed in slaying Bahamut, which caused Tiamat to call out to her kin, and her roar of defiance was heard by Azdaja and Vitra, who immediately flew to her aid. As powerful as the first brood are, no matter how many Voidsent the two of them put down, more kept taking their place, more kept emerging from the rift that Xande created. Seeing that they had no hope of victory so long as the Void Gate remained open, Azdaja risked an all-or-nothing final attack as she flew directly into the rift in an attempt to reseal it. Now, she was successful in this. She was able to seal the rift, but the result caused the rift to close up behind her and leaving her trapped within the void. Vitra, who tried to follow after her, was left devastated at the loss of his sister and vowed to find a way to reunite with her no matter what. He would then spend years scouring the land in an attempt to find a way to cross the rift. Eventually, this led to the discovery of an unstable planar fissure beneath the waters of the Bounty that led straight into the void. Due to this, he took the island of Thavnar as his abode in order to find a way to expand the fissure. Eventually, he was the one who founded the city-state of Razadhand, and he would enlist the aid of the alchemists to study the fissure. After years of experiments, they were able to find a way to expand it so that it reached the size that a small child could fit through, but it was also stabilized. Once the fissure was stabilized into a real void gate, Vitra commissioned a simulacrum of a small child so that he would be able to explore the rift and see if he could find Azdaja. So one of his eyes was placed within this simulacrum, and he was able to successfully cross the rift and into the 13th, only to be overwhelmed by a literal swarm of Voidsent. Vitra quickly realized that even just this small opening was too dangerous and decided that he had to seal the fissure up and abandon his search for Azdaja. And instead, he chose to focus on governing Thavnar as the satrap behind the curtain. But the loss of his sister continued to weigh heavily upon his mind for centuries afterwards. After the events of the final days, while looking for treasure, the fissure was discovered by the Warrior of Light and the disbanded scions of Y'shtola, Istinian, Urianger, and Graha. It was here that Vitra disclosed the full truth to them, which immediately drew Y'shtola's interest, because she believed that by studying it, she may discover the means of traveling between the source and its other reflections. Thus, she was the one who offered to help Vitra search for his sister. While hesitant at first, but with the encouragement of the Warrior of Light and the citizens of Razathan, he agreed to continue on the search as well. Sadly, not much else is known about Azdaja, but she was obviously a very loving sister to Vitra, who states that words could not describe what she meant to him. She was also obviously very bold, brave, selfless, and maybe a little reckless after sacrificing herself to seal the Void Gate. Now, as of 6.1, Vitra, he has a new sense of hope that he might be able to still reunite with Azdaja even after all these years. But we have to remember that she has been lost to the void for at least 5,000 years. We learned that overexposure to the 13th shard, which is filled with a darkness-aspected ether, can transform one into a voidsent themselves. That's generally what happened to the 13th shard and how it became the world of darkness, because it was flooded by a literal flood of darkness, which ended up corrupting the people who still remained there, and that's where all the voidsent came from. So even just being in this place for too long is very dangerous. It will corrupt a person's ether and twist them into an abomination of a voidsent. Just like how being overexposed to light ether can transform one into a sin eater. And if we need proof of that, we just need to look back to the Crystal Tower series, where Nero was very dangerously close to transforming into a voidsent simply by being in the void for too long. Though in Azdaja's case, she does have an advantage by being one of the first brood. She's very powerful, she has a veritable wellspring of ether in the form of her eyes, so she's much stronger, both in body and in mind and spirit, I suppose, than a regular person would be. I mean, the first brood are not weaklings, and they have powerful wills and resistance to such corruption. We've seen several cases of this already, such as in the form of Tiamat, who, despite being tempered by the primal Bahamut, she was still able to remain sane of mind. And Vitra's scales form the base of the warding scales, which are talismans made to protect one from being tempered in the first place. Though, of course, there are still limitations to that, as we've seen at the end of 6.1, where they're going to be making other adjustments to the warding scales so that they will be able to protect the Warrior of Light and the others as they venture into the void. So, I'm confident that Azdaja could have resisted any kind of corruption or any kind of transformations for a fair amount of time. The thing is, though, is that 5,000 years is a very long time, even for one of the first brood, and could she have fought it off for that long? It's possible, but highly unlikely. As much as I hate to say it, I think it's much more likely that she would have succumbed to the transformation given enough time. Still, I guess it's just the optimistic part of me, but I do want to believe it's possible that we can not only save her, but reunite her with Vitra and bring her back into the source. Is that possible? Well, let's look at the best case scenario. That we go to the void, and by some miracle, we're able to locate and track down Azdaja. And not only is she alive, but she was able to somehow fight off the corruption for 5,000 years. She's still sane of mind. She might be on the brink of becoming a voidsent, but she is still sane of mind, and it's not too late to be able to reverse the damage. That is the best case scenario. Now, the first problem is the portal, because creating a portal large enough for a single person to slip through at a time is going to be vastly different than a portal that would need to be large enough to fit Azdaja, who, of course, is a dragon and is probably at least 20 times as large as a human is. Now, that could be an easy fix, assuming that Y'shtola and Nadana are able to complete the Animos, and it's able to manipulate the portal to make it as big as it needs to be. So if we can do that, then yes. So best case scenario is that the stars all align, and like the fates and the gods are getting directly involved, and we're able to find Azdaja, and the Animos is able to create a portal large enough to fit her through, then yes, it is possible to save her and reunite with Vitra, but come on, let's be honest. What are the odds of that happening? Since when has it ever been that easy? I think the Scions are just so used to the gods kind of making things difficult for them, just kind of laughing at them and just seeing how they respond to all these ridiculous outcomes all the time, so that when something goes right for them, it kind of is suspicious. That's at least how I feel it is. So I'm not saying it's going to be impossible. I mean, we still don't have the full story of what could have happened to her. I will say though that while saving Azdaja is possible, I do not think for a second it's going to be easy. But hey, a slim chance is still a chance. And with Azdaja, we will either end up rescuing her or be left with no other choice but to kill her at this point. It really all depends on how deep the darkness could have corrupted her and if there's really anything left of her to save. But the real question is Azdaja still herself after 5,000 years of total darkness? I can't imagine that she would be happy to have been left alone in a terrible place for so long. Granted, crossing the rift is not something that just anybody can do, and I'm sure she knows that, but I could imagine some bitterness for being forced to wait that long, especially if she finds out that Vitra did choose at one point to kind of give up on her. But let's just move on real quick to the most popular fan theory that we have for Azdaja at the moment. Now, this is not going to be the main theory that I came up with, but it is the most popular. And it's that she was enslaved by Golbaz as his shadow dragon servant. So for those of you who don't know about Golbaz, I promise I'll make this quick, but he was the antagonist from Final Fantasy IV. And he was also the main antagonist that we dealt with for most of the game. In the end, it turns out he was just a puppet for another antagonist, but Golbez was the one that was pretty much doing all the heavy lifting for this, like the main big bad guy. But during the battle with him, specifically after locating the underworld crystals in the Dwarven Kingdom and defeating Calcabrina, Golbez appears and he battles with Sissel and the party. This is where we see him summon the Shadow Dragon for the first time. It's a summon that defeats the party, save for Sissel, and he's about to pretty much finish off the entire group in one final blast. And the Shadow Dragon probably would have killed everybody here if Rydia didn't appear at the last possible moment and defeated the Shadow Dragon with the Mist Dragon. Yeah, and with all the Final Fantasy IV references that we've had since Endwalker came out, not to mention the gear that we get from Razat Han is literally the same gear from Final Fantasy IV, it seems reasonable to assume that a similar fate could have befallen Azdaja. It's certainly possible that maybe she ran into the Golbez-like figure that we saw in 6.1, and he saw just how powerful she was and wanted that power for himself, and thus maybe he battled with her for a long time or used some kind of dark magic to corrupt her mind. Either way, it's certainly possible that he could have somehow enslaved her against her will to become his servant. But, I mean, as much as I like the theory, I don't think that's what happened, because Yoshi P loves to surprise us. He really does. He just loves taking like all these different theories that we have and basically toss them out the window and say, no, we are going to be doing something that's the exact opposite of it and that no one will see coming. So that's kind of what he does. I think he just gets a kick out of that. So, assuming that Azdaja was imprisoned or enslaved by Golbez, it does seem a little bit too convenient. As much as Yoshi P loves using references from other Final Fantasy games within 14, he doesn't like to stick to the exact same storyline as any of those other games. References he loves to do, but keeping with the exact same story, no, he definitely doesn't like doing that. And I don't think that he would want to go too similar about the whole concept of, you know, enslaving a giant shadow dragon and that turns out to be Azdaja. I don't know, I just have a hard time believing that. So unless they're able to put that whole thing into a spin in a new way, I can't really see them going with such a simple explanation. I do think that Golbez seems to have some kind of connection with Azdaja, but maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Could it be possible that Golbez is Azdaja? That this is just the effect that the Void had on her? I mean, it would be different and a unique twist on the whole thing if it turns out that she is some kind of transformed version of a dragon. And it would make bringing her back to the source maybe a little bit easier if she just happens to be smaller, but how could she have taken on such a form? Could the corruption have done this to such a point that it twisted her into a monstrous form based on what she thinks is monstrous, aka a human-like form? We have this Golbez lookalike who has revealed in 6.1 along with the 4 other elementals of different elements who are kind of plotting something here. But we do have the earth, fire, wind, and water elementals, which is definitely a reference to the 4 archfiends from Final Fantasy IV, whom I'm pretty sure are going to be part of the new trial series. And we can have this work 2 different ways, one of which is that we simply fight all 4 of these archfiends, or that we have a battle with maybe 3 of these lords, and maybe the 4th lord could be some kind of instance duty like how we had with the Sapphire weapon, and we just leave Golbez for last where we fight against him as the final trial for Endwalker. I say this because I'm honestly going to be surprised if the Archfiends live past the 6.x series before we move on to 7.0. But if you think about it, if we defeat the Archfiends here and then we try to destroy Golbez, only for us to discover that it's actually a transformed Azdaja, I mean, that could cause us to hesitate maybe long enough for Golbez to escape. Maybe even going as far as to escape into the source through the same portal that we created. So assuming that that's what happens and Golbez does escape into the source, it could be the perfect opportunity for us to follow them, maybe to one of the other lands. Like, I can imagine that maybe Golbez doesn't even realize that they were actually Azdaja, they were actually a dragon in a previous form, and like all these memories maybe are being suppressed, but the moment that they emerge into the source, their memories start to come back, and they're trying to follow the memories. Maybe she ends up going down south towards Mericidia because that's what she remembers doing last before she flew straight off into the void, and she's just trying to follow her memories and just trying to put the pieces together. But that would also give us a good chance to be able to follow her directly south to Mericidia. And we could travel the continent trying to find her, trying to hunt down this Golbez, be introduced to new characters, new enemies, whole new storyline, and I mean, it would definitely work. It could definitely fit into a really exciting story if you ask me. Or maybe we could end up going a little bit more to the west to the New World. We still know so precious little of the New World, and it's certainly large enough to stretch not only into just one expansion, but maybe even 2. The only reason I even suggest the New World, though, is because I was looking at the map of Eorzea, and I realized something very interesting. And I don't know if they did this on purpose, or maybe I'm just looking for Easter eggs where there are none. But I think that going west could be the clue we need to save Azdaja. And why do I think that? Because as of right now in the game, we have dragons that represent roughly the cardinal directions. So we have Race Valgar to the north, Tiamat to the south, and Vitra to the east. So I think it would be thematically appropriate for Azdaja to be appearing in the west. Though the only land I can really think of that lies to the direct west would be the New World. But if that's really what happened to her, though, if she really has gone so far as to actually be transformed into Golbez, we may not be able to save her. Still, Golbez was spared back in Final Fantasy IV when he was kind of brought back to his senses, and again, dragons are remarkably resistant. And I think that it would be a nice callback to Sissel and Golbez because they were actually brothers, they were siblings, and Golbez recognized him almost right away, but the dark influence on his mind kind of blocked all of that out and kind of beat down all of those like brotherly feelings like he may have had. At least until he was able to break free of it once and for all. Could we have a play of that here with Vitra and his sister like trying to bring her back to her senses, all the while trying to find a way to free her from such a corruption of ether? As much as I would love to reunite these two, it's a little too much to hope for that she would be able to retreat to a place within the void where she was safe from being corrupted for all those years. I did do a video a little while ago about a possibility of an entire expansion of the Void and how I thought that storyline could possibly go. So unless Azdaja was able to work that whole theory in, I don't see how she could have avoided complete corruption. I was just so excited over the possibility of an expansion in the Void that I kind of made this theory up, and looking back, I think it might be a little bit more like fan fiction, but hey, if you want to check it out and see what you think, the link will be back down in the description. But we're almost done here. So yeah, I do think that most likely Azdaja is somehow Golbez, like a transformed Golbez, and saving her is going to be extremely difficult. Can't be the only one who wants to see them reunited, especially after everything that's happened to them. It's still far too early to be able to judge for sure what will happen without more information, but I do think that we will at least discover Azdaja's fate before 7.0. Whether or not we can still bring her back before the next expansion, or if the story will continue on over into 7.0, is still up in the air. I predict that we're going to be getting these short little trips into the Void and discover, I guess, what we can call base camps within the Void that we'll be able to visit and study more of the Void as the rest of 6.2 and onwards continue. The deeper that we head into the Void, however, the more we'll start to gain the attention of Golbez and the Archfiends, if that's truly what they are, and they're going to be drawn to us, possibly in the hopes of either escaping the Void or find a way to start restoring the Void itself. But that's a whole other can of worms if the Void can't be saved. Either way, we're going to start the trial fights with the Archfiends, which will be perfect in forms of different elements since we already had trials of light, darkness, and I guess despair. So classic elements would be a nice mix-in as well. Eventually, I think that we're going to be able to defeat the Archfiends, meet up with Golbez, where Vitra is able to somehow recognize his sister trapped within, and we're going to see if we can either find a way to separate her from Golbez or restore her to her original form. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm starting to think that maybe this is actually more of a merger instead of a simple corruption. Maybe this could be an introduction to the new enemy, by way of actually possessing Azdaja and fusing with her to gain not only her strength, but using her ether to control the other Archfiends. And even if we're somehow able to save Azdaja, the enemy could end up breaking free and escape into the source, again, forcing us to actually give chase. Well, one of those theories is what I truly believe for the time being. Again, we haven't even made it to 6.2 yet, which if I had to give my best time to when it's going to be coming out, I would say at the earliest, sometime in August. I think around August 9th would be the earliest time that we could be seeing 6.2. So hopefully we'll get some more clues to Azdaja during that time, and maybe a better idea to what Golbez could possibly be and what he's planning. Anyway, that's going to be it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed my theory and reasoning behind the mystery of the 7th child of the first brood. Here's hoping that we will be able to save her in the end, but until next time, everyone, thank you for watching.